Hi, I'm Roy Myers. I'm an ACPE certified educator and currently serving as an Army chaplain and currently serving as the director of the Army CPE Center at Brooke Army Medical Center. I'm here today to talk with you a little bit about personality theory, specifically how we begin working on developing our personality theories. In this module, we're going to talk about four major categories or four major areas. Let me begin by modeling some theoretical transparency around the construction of this didactic. Joan Hemingway, in her wonderful book, Inside the Circle, informs my education practice in many ways. I am aware of two ways that you will see play out in this presentation. First, I will make application using my experience around development of my theory. Looking back, I made myself aware theory development was wonderfully expressive of my theory, and that the process itself began to inform me and even confirm that I was moving in a helpful direction. By making this note, I invite you to also pay attention to yourself in the process as a way to both integrate theory and integrate yourself in your education practice. Second, I will model my personality theory throughout my discussion of theory development as one example of a helpful and fairly well-developed theory. By bringing my theory in the light of awareness between us, I intend to model for you theory development as well as demonstrate congruence of integration in actual education practice. Perhaps you will also gain awarenesses that support you in your process. I will attempt to make clear when I'm being informed by naming insights from my process. The balance of this didactic is built around the proposed theory rubric, though not necessarily in the order presented in the rubric itself. I will endeavor to be very direct, naming the specific areas of the rubric I intend to address. I hope that you might consider how you can use the rubric itself to inform your process, while granting yourself the freedom to move through the rubric in ways that resonate with you, how you grow, and how you practice professionally. One final note, the rubric itself offers emerging and competent measures for each item. I will focus more on the competent measures and attempt to acknowledge the emerging measures as helpful guides that move toward competence in professional education. Theory is your understanding of how humans function and how human personality forms and grows. The process of pastoral education recognizes that education occurs with human persons. CPE, in my mind, is a process of creating an environment wherein pastoral education students seek to grow, particularly in the learner's ability to provide pastoral care in diverse contexts. It is often a very personal process that touches deep processes within pastoral students. CPE is not therapy, and it often touches deep growing mechanisms and needs within certified educators and students alike. Therefore, a robust understanding of human function and growth and formation is essential. A knowledge of personality theory can help the certified educator assess the needs of students and assist in the shaping of a learning environment, clarifying educational alliances between educator and students, and individual interventions with students. A part of your process requires that you find a theorist that you use to inform your practice of pastoral education. That theorist does not define the what or how of education as much as it provides the why in your pastoral education program. I strongly recommend that you begin this process by exploring a variety of formal personality theories. In the following slides, I will offer an overview of contemporary formal personality theory. I take the data and perspective from Salvatore R. Matti, Personality Theories, A Contemporary Analysis, 6th edition. Books like this can prove a very helpful resource and survey of particular theories. These are a great place to begin exploring personality theory and theorists. Matti acknowledges the complexity of theories and perspectives around human personality and growth. He suggests this complexity can be overcome for those beginning to explore personality theory. He offers a comparative analysis classifying theories in groups by type or model as a way to enter into a very complex arena of personality theory. Maddie provides 3 models for personality theory: the conflict model, the fulfillment model, and the consistency model. Insights from my process. My personality theory helps me lean into my empathy for the learner and the learning struggle and address the needs that can emerge in an oft-time intense learning environment and process. My personality theory informs me in many ways. For example, my personality theory enables me to make myself more aware of how challenging human growth can be for students, as it has been for me. Inspired by a deepening sense of empathy around the challenges potential in any CPE process, my personality theory informs the ways that I integrate my empathy as I come alongside students. The conflict model. The conflict models theorize that human person is trapped in conflict between fundamental internal forces, which are opposed and are largely unchangeable. According to these theories, the human is in conflict within as the opposing personality forces compete with each other in the functioning of the individual. The presence of this inherent and perpetual conflict within the person emerges in human relationships as social conflict. That which is inherently unresolved in the personality tends to emerge as unresolved external relationships between individuals. This model explains unhealthy function as an unbalanced favoring of one internal force and the suppression of the other. Healthy human function involves the ability of the human personality to achieve some kind of cohabitated balance of the forces operating within the human personality. Resolution of this fundamental conflict is largely regarded as impossible. Compromise between the fundamental forces is the key to movement into healthy human function. Maddie uses the example of selfishness versus altruism. These two forces create internal conflicts because they pull the personality in seemingly opposite directions. One toward an emphasis on self, one toward an emphasis on the other or others. They emerge in human behavior as opposite behaviors. Unhealthy human function in this case might emerge as an over-preference of altruism or an over-preference of selfishness and a suppression of the other. Maddie names 2 versions of this model, the psychosocial version and the intraphasic version. The former places emphasis on the social situation around the personality. The latter focuses more on the internal experience of the individual. The conflict theory suggests that human development occurs as the person wrestles with the conflict of these fundamental human forces. Deficits in human development emerge as the personality is influenced to prefer one side of the conflict over and against the other. Human growth involves engaging the internal conflict as the individual is able to bring their conflict into awareness. In so doing, the individual can move toward compromise between the conflicting forces in their personhood. Insights from my process. My primary personality theorist, Fritz Perls, is one example of the intraphasic version of the conflict model. Throughout this didactic, I'll make reference to how I understand human personality and the internal conflict described by Fritz Perls. I will attempt to model the ways I integrate my understanding of this kind of fundamental internal human conflict in my personal and professional process. Within my theory, there is a simultaneous human urge to join with and to remain distinct from. Conflict in me emerges as anxiety around which I have various levels of awareness. The lesser levels of awareness I might be inclined to overly favor one urge, say being separate or away from, against the other, being close to others, often taking on a more reactive stance. Moving towards self-awareness, I seek to creatively bring compromise, embracing both urges as valid and valuable. Healthy ego function for me is holistic, authentic, and personally responsible. And I encourage you to, as you look through the balance of this module, to see how that plays out even in how I teach this class. The fulfillment model. The fulfillment model understands that the human person is emerging from a singular force, which exists at the core of the human person. Humans are seen as having great potential, and the human process is one of moving toward that potential. The person is ideal and an expression of that who the person is at the core. Healthy human function is expressed by the individual expressing self in increasingly more holistic, effective, and sophisticated ways. The model tends to see humans as potential expressions of a built-in, internally defined human ideal. If conflict emerges for the person, it is conflict between external and internal, where the external attempts to dissuade the person from that ideal core. The person in this case learns to move away from their ideal personhood in favor of an accommodated external demands and social conventions. Maddie names two versions for this model, the actualization version and the perfection version. The former focuses mainly on actualizing the ideal potential inherent in each person. The latter features less interest in the inherent in individuals in favor of universalizing ideals around that which is excellent and meaningful in life. The human develops in this model toward the ideal by affirming its inherent value and demonstrating a courageous adherence to internal values. Effective human growth occurs as the person embraces their own value, especially in the face of demands to conform. So this model might encourage parents to emphasize the inherent worth of the individual, enabling them to avoid self-criticism and self-loathing. The student's struggle can be seen as an expression of what is wrong with society and is less regarded as a problem that is internal to the human person. Insights from my process. In many ways, I found the fulfillment model as attractive, particularly the existential versions. I resonate a lot with Viktor Frankl's logotherapy. For example, I resonate with Frankl's emphasis on the meaning-making capacity of the human. At various times, reframing meaning in my suffering has been very helpful. On the other hand, I struggle to locate my conflict merely with societal forces or as some internal ideal. Much of my struggle has emerged as I was able to make myself aware of the forces within me that gave too much voice to societal forces around me. The consistency model. The consistency model pays little attention to the fundamental forces in the human formation of personality. Instead, the model emphasizes ways humans receive feedback from the external world that informs the direction of their development. Interaction always includes sets of expectations or norms. Interactions between the individual and the world around them tends to confirm or disconfirm the external expectations and norms for the person. Whenever the individual's process is consistent with expectations and norms, life is good for the individual. Should there be inconsistency between the individual's function and the expectations and norms, the individual experiences pressure to make adjustments toward consistency. This model understands human life as an attempt to maintain consistency between self and external expectations and norms. There is a de-emphasis around ideals and versions of non-ideal lifestyles and around developmental patterns. Maddie identifies two versions of this model, the cognitive dissonance version and the activation version. Human development is a matter of consistency and/or inconsistency with external expectations and norms. Where a developing human experiences inconsistency, there will likely be an impact on their behavior. The less consistency, the more problematic the behavior. The more consistency, the more life is good. This theory tends to avoid making distinctions between ideal and non-ideal lifestyles in favor of positive experience of consistency. Insights from my process. This model appeals to me the least of the three. I'm aware that I have a lot of disquiet in my life around the pressures and expectations and norms I have experienced, especially in my family of origin. Generally, I have chosen in life to live in the tension of disjuncture. Perhaps this is one of the factors that attracts me to the conflict model. Entertaining this theory, however, was a helpful way of highlighting a shortfall in my personality theory. My theory does not directly address the interaction between the self and society and culture. I selected a learning theorist, Peter Jarvis, whose theory provided insights around potential disjuncture that can emerge between my experience as a human and my experience of the aughts my society or family of origin gave me. My journey reminds me of how valuable it can be to explore broadly, even taking a look at those theories and theorists that might not at first seem to fit well within your process. Moving from our survey of contemporary theories, I'll take a look at the development of personality theory itself in your process. The remainder of this didactic is formed around the rubric which describes what needs to be in each theory. I'll move on to a discussion of what your personality theory can do in your practice of pastoral education. I'll spend some time then talking about and addressing what your personality theory can do for your practice of pastoral education. Your personality theory enables you to articulate a depth of understanding of the human person. Your theory can also help you in that it makes your understanding of the human person practical. And this is an important piece of all of the theories, I think, is the practicality. How does it inform your assessments of students? How does it inform your assessments with them? And how does it inform the overall design and program design that you will develop in your practice of pastoral education? Personality theory articulates a depth of understanding of how personality is formed and shaped. Earlier, I provided an overview of contemporary personality theories. A deep understanding involves awareness around the field of personality theory, and it includes a depth of understanding of the theorists you use to inform your practice of pastoral education. Personality theory for ACPE certification is more than what the theorists write about humans and human growth. The understanding envisioned here is an integrated one. Your personality theory is your theory. It is your understanding of your theory and reflects your experience and personhood as much as it is informed by the theorists and their formal theories. Along the way, you can use your experience in life and in professional function to inform your development. How do you understand your own strengths and challenges, limitations and possibilities? We'll discuss this more in the section entitled A Personality Theory of Your Own. Insights from my process. My personality theory, like my other theories, rests on the idea of learning energy. Most of the theorists I use refer to that learning energy as anxiety. Anxiety is a part of my story and at the heart of my human struggle. My very anxious mom taught me that anxiety was fearful and dangerous. I learned to connect my anxiety with failure, self-loathing, and shame. In life, I notice a propensity to shrink back whenever I encounter this anxiety, being tempted to conclude that I am dumb, useless, and the cause of others' anxiety as well as my own. Growth occurred in me as I began to make friends with the shame and that energy that would kick up in me that so often seemed to hinder me. Making friends with shame, I began to work back into the anxiety I often associated with shame. As I listened to the shame, not what the shame said about me, but what the shame had to say about my situation, I began to reframe my anxiety. It became for me both invitation and temptation. The anxiety, far from a proclamation of what is wrong with me, became an invitation to lean into experiences of anxiety, to learn from them. Anxiety invites me to engage my unfinished business as it emerges into consciousness. Anxiety became as much learning energy as it was temptation to move back from myself in self-doubt and self-loathing. Personality theory demonstrates how one's personality theory informs practice. A personality theory is helpful only when it emerges as informative for your personal story. Personality theory provides a helpful conceptual understanding of humanity around which we can frame our assessment of students' learning needs and the interventions designed to engage their growth process. Your theory is a practical one, which is helpful to you as well as to your students. Your theory demonstrates that practice by connecting how your understanding emerges in educational relationships. Your experience developing as a human being, your experience contributing to the growth of other human beings is a part of your process. And I encourage you to integrate your lived experience as you form your personality theory. You might consider asking how your understanding of human formation and human growth informs various aspects of your emerging practice of pastoral education. How does your personality theory inform your assessment of students' process? How might your understanding of human growth inform your interventions? Insights from my process. Learning energy is an important part of my supervision that powerfully informs my assessments and interventions of students. I pay attention to the energy that emerges in the student's process, especially around rally point experiences. These rally point experiences, as I defined in my theory, often emerge as students encounter unfinished business, their unfinished business, in their learning process. A rally point occurred for me following my first ACPE candidate committee. The anxiety I feared so much emerged as I entered the room, and it emerged loudly. I concluded in the moment that I would fail, and so I did, in the moment. I found the invitation to engage my unfinished business around that anxiety. Over the process of several months, helpful supervision, and some very good therapy, I was able to use the experience to reframe my anxiety, finding not only the fear and self-loathing, but the possibilities and the hope in my anxious learning energy. Sometimes learning energy predominantly expresses itself in eagerness and desire to engage in meaningful experiences in an action, reflection, action learning process. Often, learning energy emerges predominantly as resistance and reluctance on the part of the student to engage rally point experiences. Both, in my theory, are important parts of learning. My theory helps me in at least two ways. One, I can empathize with the ambivalent energy that can emerge in human growth. It has in mine, and I think it does in my students as well. Two, the use of my personality theory helps me shape assessments and interventions that are integrated with myself and effective in the relationship that I have with my students. Now we begin to move to a discussion around making your personality theory your own. Beginning with a survey of available theorists might seem to overrate the importance of external theorists and theory. The theory you develop will be your own and really needs to be your own. Ideally, it is a reflection of your ministry, values, personhoods, as much as it expresses ideas from theories and theorists. Both are important. The next few slides will primarily address reflection and self-assessment and connection integration as parts of your personality theory development, as well as within the theory itself. I am convinced that the personal and professional function are inexorably linked. There's a lot I can say about that conviction. For purposes of this didactic, my conviction reminds me that personal function can be a tremendous resource to help you develop your professional functioning. In other words, your experience as a forming human being certainly can, and I think will be helpful if it informs your professional theoretical framework and practice. In this process, I encourage you to take a look at the questions that are on this slide here. Pay attention to how your personal experiences might help you see yourself and your practice of education more clearly. Pay attention to how your strengths and challenges inform your process and how they emerge into professional practice. And perhaps the best thing I can say, be a student of your own process as much as you are a student of the various theorists and supervisors that you'll learn from. Reflection and self-assessment. Your personality theory, like other theories, can emerge from brightening clarity around your own process. Your reflective experiences can offer clues as to the way you grow. Practicing honest self-assessment can foster an ability to see the connections between your strengths and challenges, and those formative experiences can form a helpful backdrop for an emerging personality theory. This kind of reflective stance can also facilitate broadening awareness around the complexities involved in human processes and growth. It also offers an entree into reflection around the ways culture, context, belief systems also inform growth in your process and that of those around you. What does your story tell you about your growth processes? What connections are apparent between your context and experiences and how you grow and learn? How do you understand and integrate ambiguity, risks, uncertainty in your process? Insights from my process. I chose Fritz Perls as my primary personality theorist in large part from my experience reading his work, Ego, Hunger, and Aggression. I noticed several times in my reading how much I resonated with the descriptions that he offers of human experience and growth. Unlike my reading of other theorists, Perls made sense to me almost immediately. His perspective and theory helped me clarify my own learning process and seemed to very naturally translate in helpful ways into my practice of pastoral education. Resonance between your theorist and your process can be a helpful clue as to what theorist and theory might be helpful in your education process. Specifically, I began to notice the emergence of a lot of anxiety around my process. I noticed that when I felt anxious, say for example going into my first candidate committee, I often found myself rehearsing messages like, Roy is dumb. I noticed that the anxious self-shaming pattern tended to shut me down, limiting my ability to learn and stay authentic in human relationships with others. I had some unfinished business around my early process of education, and this really came to light in my process. I'm dyslexic, and I struggle to learn, particularly around learning that is primarily visual. Somewhere in this process, I remembered hearing my second grade teacher tell my parents, "Roy is not very smart, and we'll just have to accept his limitations." Fritz Perl's understanding of anxiety informed my process as I realized that this kind of anxiety, when used to create self-awareness, can inspire self-awareness around the emergence of unfinished business. And I had a lot of unfinished business around whether I was smart enough or not. By laying hold of that self-awareness that I may be making conclusions about myself based on anxiety and a negative perception of my anxiety, there's a rally point experience wherein I was able to begin authentically addressing my learning needs and attending to my needs by affirmation, affirming my ability to learn in my unique and special ways. The shame-inspired anxiety I sometimes used to push away from myself and others became learning energy. I needed to brighten self-awareness to make my learning experiences come alive and facilitate growth, moving into creative integration of my lived experience. Your theory will also need to include connection and integration. Like other theories, your personality theory is both extensive and intensive. Extensive means that your theory demonstrates substantial knowledge of major concepts and references in the field. The theory also gives evidence of a working familiarity with and a critical use of relevant literature in the field, demonstrating an awareness of the primary sources critical to the theory espoused. There's a lot of words there. It's also extensive in that your theory draws upon examples and facts and theories from more than one field of study, discipline, or perspective. Intensive means that you understand your theory in depth and that you are able to make practical connections with the components of CPE. You need to know the theory and be able to easily explain life and growing situations and offer practical insights into you as an educator and engage them. In the beginning of the process, that means a lot of reading. So there may be a foot stomp here. Read, 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 read. As you begin to identify a primary theorist that fits well with life as you have lived it, begin to expand your reading, looking for theorists who offer critique of your primary theorist. Who's writing stuff that disagrees with your theorist? How do they say it? How do you experience what they have to say? Reading extensively will enable you to bring a variety of resources to bear, and later on to identify things like a helpful critical. A critical piece of connection is your ability to connect your theory with lived experience. This is a practical way that you can use reflection and self-assessments as you begin building your theory. What examples emerge from your experience in professional practice, personal life, and relationships that expose and help you demonstrate practical connections between your theory and your practice of supervision? Insights from my process. Although I wrote my papers within a different system, some of my experience may be helpful for you. I made practice early on of capturing experiences, situations, and relationships that seemed to be relevant to what I was reading and the theories I was working on. I kept a journal, I kept notes, and in many different ways tried to capture these fundamental learning experiences with students and with others. Often these ended up in my weekly process notes or in an archive I began to maintain. As I began writing my theory papers, I was able to return to these notes, archives, to identify meaningful vignettes that demonstrated practical understanding of and use of my theories. As I mentioned in the last slide, Fritz Perls' personality theory resonated with me, and I made good use of my learning around personality theory to move forward in my process. My exploration of Perls' theory was very helpful. I began to connect the theory with my lived experience and integrate my burgeoning personality theory in my practice of pastoral education. My practical experience with my shame and anxiety around learning became one of my strengths in pastoral education. I have a great deal of empathy for students as they can sometimes struggle with learning and with their own anxiety around the learning process. DW was a 46-year-old European-American man representing a Southern Baptist tradition. I noticed that DW sat back from the group during an IPR early in his process. I asked about his behavior. He replied, "I don't like this. I don't like conflict." I asked him to talk about how he felt. He said, "It just feels impossible. I don't think anything good can come from this." I noticed that DW seemed self-conscious around his feelings. I came alongside him by reflecting, "I noticed that you told me about your conclusion, but I did not hear how you feel." DW thought for a moment and responded, "I feel angry. And I just don't want to go there." My intervention opened dialogue between DW and me around how his avoidance of anger was impeding his process. DW struggled with his conviction that his anger would destroy relationships, as he had seen so many times in his family of origin. I offered observations of anger in DW's process. Our dialogue empowered DW to make himself aware of what he previously avoided. As a result, DW was increasingly able to navigate conflict, thus increasing his capacity to care for hurting people. The process took time and required patience in me, in DW, and in his peers. Your theory is also going to want to touch congruence with other theories. Your three theories are much less independent works and much more three chapters or reflections of a single theoretical framework. It may be helpful to think about how each of your theories contribute to your overall theory of pastoral education. Your theories need congruence. In other words, your theories work together. Theories that focus on very different aspects of human experience, personhood, or learning may cause incongruence in your overall theory. For example, a theory focused on fulfillment or consistency themes may seem incongruent with a personality theory that is focused on the conflict model theme. That is not to say that seemingly incongruent theories cannot be used together. Instead, I recommend that you be honest and honestly engage these seeming incongruities. Be clear about how each aspect of your theory works with other aspects of your overall theory. Insights from my process. I took some time after I had a solid draft of my personality and theology papers to consider how each of them were different. As an existentialist, the process of learning to use my experience is very important. And as that comes out very much in my theories and in my theology. They were all tracking in very similar directions. Congruence for me was not a problem. I found it helpful, though, to get specific about how each theory was different and how I was using each theory to support various aspects of my educational practice. So the congruence kind of almost itself became a problem for me as the theories really tended to overlap a lot. By looking at how each theory was distinct, I was able to find that my theology helped me introduce the idea of learning energy, and how that can be an emergence from human experience as both invitation and temptation. Invitation and temptation is actually an idea out of my theology, not so much out of my personality theory. My theology often informs the stances I choose to take with students in the light of their emergence, their learning emergences. My personality theory articulates more specifically how human learning energy can emerge in ways that both facilitate growth and inhibit it, focused more on growth. My personality theory informs my assessments and interventions with students as they struggle to gain helpful self-awareness in the various program elements I offer in my educational program. My learning theory informs how I shape learning contexts and relationships in ways that students can learn from the learning energy. Disjuncture is an idea that comes out of my learning theorist that emerges for individuals within social structures. My learning theory provides the theoretical basis around my practice of many of the program elements I use in supervisory education. So we're going to move from here to a brief examination of the components or the different pieces that need to be included in a working effective personality theory. You'll notice in the rubric that this is included for all of the different theories that you're writing. So these need to be included in all of your papers. I'm going to attempt to kind of focus and look at this specifically in terms of your personality theory. You need to demonstrate a utilization of theory. How do you do that? How do you use your theory? An effective personality theory describes the educator's own understanding of humanity, how the human person forms and grows. The personality theory is informed by a particular theorist, and it is able to make critical use of relevant literature. Your theory needs to demonstrate a robust knowledge of the theorist as well as other resources. The basis for this is an accurate and thorough representation of your theorist and other personality theory related resources. Your theory paper demonstrates how you are informed by your theory. Critical to the development of personality theory is your ability to articulate the theoretical why of supervision. The why steps beyond merely telling what you do or how you do it. The why is really theory applied. An effective personality theory demonstrates how the personality theory informs, is utilized by you in your practice of pastoral education. Insights from Roy's process. Many come to their CPE experience with unfinished business, an idea that comes out of my personality theory. This unfinished business is often made up of lived experiences that have not been completed, made part of the whole person. Unfinished business often emerges in life surrounded by anxious energy. Growth can occur whenever a student is able to bring the emergence of this anxious energy into self-awareness. In self-awareness, the student is able to attend to the experience, transform it, bring it to light, make it into learning energy. My theory is informed by Fritz Perls when he suggests that human growth, movement toward authentic human function, is the product of the individual person weaving together experiences into a coherent whole. This is the why in my personality theory. In supervision, I choose to pay attention to the emergence of anxious energy in education process. I make myself available to observe, to discuss, and engage the anxious energy in my students. Why do I do what I do? As I come alongside students, I invite them to make themselves aware, begin to utilize that energy to attend to the rally point experience, the rally point being that time where energy emerges to clarity and they're beginning to see themselves and become self-aware of unfinished business in their process. For example, LW was a 46-year-old African-American woman from an independent Christian church tradition. Her second unit She expressed frustration around inauthenticity she noticed in her peer group interactions. I noticed that LW seemed to have achieved a capacity to nurture others, but was reluctant to name her own interests. I invited LW to imagine expressing her frustration, but she concluded that was not worth bringing up. An unfinished situation emerged as she described her family of origin's demand that LW take care of others, but dismiss her own needs, interests, and concerns. I named the unfinished situation as I experienced it, suggesting that she might begin with her ability to care. In this care, though, I inquired about her ability to care for herself. LW began to see caring as an invitation to be herself and to affirm her needs and concerns in the moment. To my delight, LW developed an authentic capacity to care for herself, which she passed on to her peers and patients. Within your theory, you're going to need to be able to provide examples of theory in practice. Personality theory includes practical examples of how the theory works in real-life practice of pastoral education. Examples can be difficult, especially as your theory is in its formative stages, especially as you're just beginning. It can be very helpful in an ongoing body of lived experiences in your practice and from everyday life. Begin by noticing connections. Connections can be really, really helpful and really important. You might give some time to examining by yourself and in group how these experiences might be reflective of your theory. It doesn't have to be perfect reflections, just start noticing and see what comes up for you. As that awareness expands, you might consider how your theorist might speak to the experience at hand. How would they assess the needs of the student or your needs or whatever experience you're looking at? From there, you can begin to play with the interventions that you might offer, looking at various ways to respond, to intervene. Again, you can return at this point to your theorists and burgeoning theory to inform you. What kinds of possibilities and interventions might come to mind as you reflect on the work that you have done with students and with others? The last piece of the vignette is an honest appraisal of what happened in the process of your student. As you build a collection of vignettes, consider the teaching value of those interventions that did not work. In other words, what can you learn from the things that didn't go as well as you had hoped? Since your theory presentation is designed to express what your theory is, most of the vignettes that you will use need to reflect successful interventions. Don't miss the importance of the unsuccessful ones. The unsuccessful interventions may provide opportunities to speak to shortfalls in your theory or possibly indicate critical purchase. We'll talk about that in a few moments. Insights from my process. I began writing student summaries very early in my process, and I found this very helpful, even when I was researching and forming theory. For me, the process of theory development occurred in tandem with my formation as a certified educator. Effectively talking about the processes in your theory is critical. As you build your vignettes, I recommend that you consider articulating the following 4 items. Clearly state what you observed around the student's process. Concisely assess the student's learning situation, naming how your theory informs that assessment. 3, describe how you intervened, clearly drawing a connection between what you observed, how you assess the student, and the intervention you're offering. And finally, honestly reflect on how the intervention worked. Name the outcome, good and bad. Again, sometimes outcomes unanticipated, not good outcomes, negative outcomes, can be very helpful in showing you your theory and helping you understand your process. Your theory is going to need to include critical purchase. What is critical purchase? Critical purchase is when your theory doesn't meet the need of the student. It's when your theory doesn't do what it needs to do in the moment. No theory is perfect, complete, or capable of addressing the entirety of human experience. Every theorist and theory has strengths and weaknesses. Critical purchase addresses areas where your theory does not work in real-life practice, where your theory may not match some of your primary assumptions or views. Sometimes critical purchase can emerge around your practice of pastoral education. Sometimes theories don't facilitate helpful assessments or intervention with students, where it's just not helping you with a particular student relationship. Sensitivity, reflection, and assessment of how your theory is helping and hindering your practice of education is critical. Sometimes students can resonate more with a conflict model and will struggle to learn in an environment informed by an emphasis on consistency. Critical purchase can be another theory that informs your process when your primary theory breaks down. Insights from my process. My personality theory only briefly touches human development. Fritz Perls talks about human development, but in very general terms. I found that his treatment of human development itself was too brief to really help with certain aspects, especially in the assessment arena. And so I used Erik Erikson as critical purchase because he offers a more structured view of human development that kind of had more touchstones that I could use in actual concrete assessment of students. And so that more robust model helped me inform my assessments of student strengths and learning needs. Mark, let's break there for just a second. I got a frog throat. Your theory must, talking here about multicultural, your theory must clearly articulate how you conduct pastoral education in and with diverse contexts and with a diversity of students. I see at least 3 layers for consideration around multicultural and multi-faith components of your personality theory. The first relates to the larger nature of the context for which CPE trains chaplains. For the most part, pastoral work in clinical and institutional context brings the chaplain into contact with people, all kinds of people, representing a multitude of cultures, ethnicities, genders, orientations, faith backgrounds, etc. Pastoral education, therefore, needs to consciously address how clinical ministry might be conducted in such a way as to provide meaningful care that is truly sensitive to matters of diversity, social location, social justice, and difference. Good pastoral care is non-judgmental and effective in assessing the strengths and needs of those served. A second layer, and one that is closely related, is the learning context. Your theory must guide you as you design CPE programs that take into account differences. Not only those of the students served, but also for the students and educators as well. Third, a thoroughgoing sensitivity and understanding of how you educate in a multicultural, multi-faith environment is critical for your supervisory alliances. I am a Protestant Christian, European American man, and I have experiences in life that are largely consistent with that religious and cultural description. I am aware that I do not know what it was like for many to grow up in their context and be who they are. A good personality theory will help you form educational alliances that effectively create space for your students to learn as they are, from the backgrounds they come from, the experiences that they bring, from their lived experiences, even when you may not fully comprehend the depth or breadth of their experience. Some theorists directly address matters relating to cultural and multi-faith considerations. Some do not. Moreover, you may not be aware of how your theory does not acknowledge the experience or values of others, of other individuals, or people from a diverse background. Occasionally, some are simply marginalizing, ostracizing, and perhaps without awareness around the theoretical impact. I recommend that you take a look at the voices of dissent and critics of your theorist. These voices can often provide insights helpful to anticipate areas wherein your theories might need more specificity or critical purchase. Insights from my process. I respect lived human experience. One of my most closely held values in ministry and pastoral education is making myself available to learn from my experience and that of others. That said, without outside perspective, I can limit my capacity to engage meaningful rally point experiences in me and in those I train. My theory informs me by reminding me that experience in a diverse, multicultural, multi-faith environment can enhance growth and learning of learners and educators alike. I took time to look at a critique of Erik Erikson's developmental theory. Women theorists, like Carol Gilligan, challenge Erikson's fundamental assumption that human growth moves from identity to intimacy, suggesting that women probably grow in the opposite direction, from intimacy to identity. This theoretical awareness helps me as I create learning environments and attempt to enter into the educational alliance with students. It has made me aware that my inclination towards self-individuation as a way to enter into supervisory alliance may cause me to miss a woman student who may be more available to formation of a relationship before they commit to the work of self-individuation. My theory enables me to be attentive to the needs of students, paying attention to the dynamics of culture, social location, gender, orientation, and ethnicity. Group theory. Each of your theories need to address how students will learn in group. Each theory speaks to learning in groups as well as individual learning, growth, and development. It may be helpful to look at your understanding of group process and how you have experienced group. What worked for you and for your group? What did not? Sometimes a theorist does not speak directly to the group process. You may need to look at ideas or insights, though not directly expressed around group process, that might speak to the uniquenesses of CPE group processes. Whenever a theorist does offer specifics around group process, sometimes the group process or group theory doesn't work. What might you see as an alternative approach that facilitates a learning environment? This might be a good place for critical purchase. Insights from my process. My primary theologian and personality theorist wrote very briefly to group functioning. Group theory did not emerge as directly in my personality theory for that reason. That proved to be problematic a few years back when I took a very difficult group in the beginning of their second unit. The group was very resistant to the process, and that resistance emerged most explicitly in the group process, especially in IPR. In the moment, since I addressed resistance most directly in my personality theory, I discovered that my personality theory was not helping me work with the group's resistance and how resistance was playing out in the group context. At the time, I chose to focus my education effort on individual supervision, where my personality theory was more helpful. I have subsequently explored how resistance can be explored and addressed in a group as well, especially using some systems theory, which has provided me some helpful alternatives to address resistance as it emerges even in the group process. This is one of the areas where a breadth of reading and exploration can be very helpful to form the core of your education theory. This module has provided an introduction to personality theory as one part of the certified educator's toolbox and what is required for the certification of ACPE certified educators. In this module, I've offered a summary of contemporary personality theories. Given what is available, I recommend that you read broadly, with an ear to how you see and understand the human person. A strong connection between your personhood and your theory can be very helpful in this process. I spent some time addressing what your personality theory can do for your practice of pastoral education. Your personality theory enables you to articulate a depth of understanding of the human person. Your theory can also help you in that it makes your understanding of the human person practical, informing your assessments of students, your interventions with them, and your overall education program design. In this last section, in the next section, we talked about a personality theory of your own and addressed the importance of making the theory your own. Reflection, self-assessment, connection, integration all speak to how your personality theory might reflect who you are and how you function as a person and as a professional. Finally, the didactic ended with 5 components of a workable personality theory. I hope these offered some practical insights into the various matters of your personality theory, needs, and assessments. I thank you for your time, and I trust that what I've offered here will be helpful in your process. Have a